Underwriting for the Money Doctor Show is provided by Ryan and Casey Liquors, Main Street, Greenfield. Exploring the world, one glass at a time. West County Equipment Rental of Shelburne. Daily, weekly, monthly rentals. 625-6463 or on the web at westcountyequipment.com. Weld Communications, Marketing and Publicity. Helping businesses spread the word in the Pioneer Valley and beyond. www.weldwords.com.
There's a better life if I could be debt-free, but all my money is a mystery. I was feeling overwhelmed and it was wearing thin when I knocked on the door and heard the doctor's in. Oh, the doctor's in, the doctor's in. She got the right prescription to help you win. Oh, the doctor's in, the money doctor's in.
Hello and welcome to the Money Doctor Show. I'm Dr. Frances Rayam, president of Power Down Debt, a positive debt management company. If you've ever thought about filing a business bankruptcy, you might want to stick around today. My guest today is Steve Weiss from Schatz, Schwartz, and Fenton. I still stumble over that in Springfield, Mass. So thanks for being here again, Steve.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
You say it once.
Schatz, Schwartz, and Fenton.
Oh, it's not fair.
Just the way it sounds.
Yeah, just the way it sounds. I want to buy a vowel when I hear that name. So thank you for coming back. We've done one show with you already on personal bankruptcy, and we wanted to talk today about business bankruptcy and make it fun if we can. Is that possible?
I'm not sure if it's fun. It's interesting.
Okay.
One of the things I find interesting about it as an insolvency attorney is I have to learn about almost every kind of business that you can imagine ends up either in financial troubles or in bankruptcy sooner or later. I mean, everything from small. From used car dealers, let's say, to Enron, American Airlines,
right.
Or Lehman Brothers, for that matter.
Oh, Lehman Brothers.
Yeah. So everything that happens in the real world in business ends up going through the crucible of bankruptcy in some way or another. The recent Chapter 9 filing by Detroit, obviously goes through the bankruptcy courts. So
okay.
It's fascinating.
Well, that leads me to a question right away. Chapter 9 versus Chapter 11. Layman's terms?
Well, Chapter 9 really is just for municipal bankruptcies. It's really very rare. There have only been about 80 of them since 1930-something.
Okay.
And whether Detroit is even eligible for that is something that's actually being tried right now in Detroit. Interestingly enough for me, I used to live in Michigan, and I know the judge who's actually hearing the case. He was a judge when I was there 20 some odd years ago.
Wow.
So I'm following it with a lot of interest. But Chapter 11 is usually for business bankruptcies. There's also a Chapter 12, which is for agricultural bankruptcies, farms, fishing operations, and that type of thing.
Sure.
But for the most part, it's Chapter 11 for businesses.
Okay. So why would somebody file a Chapter 11, and what would be their other options along the way?
Well, the first thing is that I would almost always try to find the other options.
Right.
Chapter 11 is a tool in the insolvency lawyer's arsenal, so to speak, or weapon bag, but it's really only a last resort because it's anybody can get a company into Chapter 11, but A, it's expensive and distracting and uncertain, and B, getting out is not necessarily so easy.
Right.
So there are a lot of other alternatives before that, and in fact, that's why the earlier that somebody gets to someone like me or to a workout consultant or an accountant to try to work through the financial problems, the better. When the IRS is about to levy on the bank accounts, that's usually too late.
Yeah.
I've literally had calls from people at 10 o'clock on a Thursday saying the foreclosure is scheduled, and I say when? They say noon. That's too late.
Right.
True story. So outside of bankruptcy, there's a number of ways to try to restructure debts,
Sure.
either formally or informally. And my best reorganizations are ones where I've actually never filed a bankruptcy petition.
Right.
The bank or the lenders or the creditors know that I could.
That's sometimes the threat just hanging over it is enough.
Yeah, and the lenders and creditors and banks have gotten smarter over the years about knowing what could happen inside a formal bankruptcy proceeding, so they're more willing to work outside of bankruptcy.
Yeah, I agree. in full disclosure, I guess I should say that I send you referrals, sometimes you send us referrals. We're not in any other way associated. Other than that, I think we both respect each other's businesses. And in this one way, we do things that are very similar. We will both try to look for some sort of a workout before bankruptcy. And I think when people hear, oh, bankruptcy is a last resort, it goes in one ear and out the other, and they're sort of running towards bankruptcy when they cannot see any other solution. And hopefully along the way, they become educated about what the other solutions are, and we can save them from that final result. But in the end, sometimes that final filing of a Chapter 11 is the best thing for someone to do.
Yeah, sometimes it is, and sometimes also, and sometimes there aren't too many choices. I had a case a couple of years ago where I got a call on, I think it was, again, on a Thursday, and my client's business was about to get shut down because the utilities were about to get shut off. And I'm not going to mention names or anything, but by Tuesday, the company was in Chapter 11 because it was either that or let the business shut down. And it wasn't a fairly well-operating, functioning business. It's now out of Chapter 11. The problems had been caused because the business had a huge downturn in 2008 when the economy went sour, and the business declined, I think, by about 20%. Well, it has slowly but surely built itself back up again, but there was still this leftover debt that was causing a crisis.
When you said anybody can get you into a Chapter 11, getting you out is a tough thing, explain that to in general terms. Explain that to the general public about how do we, getting in is easy. You file a petition, you hope to. Yeah,
it's hard to do that in 25 words or less.
You don't need to do it in 25 words. We have time.
The easy part is filing a Chapter 11 petition, a list of the creditors and a list of the assets and everything else. And I should say the first, typically, and what I tell clients, the first and last days of the Chapter 11 case are the two most intensive. Because when a bankruptcy is filed, there are a number of motions that are called first-day motions that have to be filed along with the bankruptcy petition. Everything from a motion to pay pre-petition wages to employees, because if you don't pay the employees, they're just going to walk, to filing what's called a motion for use of cash collateral. Cash collateral is what the business operates with, and you have to get permission from the court in order to use that. And to do that, you have to have a budget and be able to show the court what the budget is and what the usage of the money is going to be. And there may be a creditors committee that gets involved in that. The part about getting out and why it's so hard is twofold. Number one, once the immediate pressure is off from credit, the initial creditor pressure is off. People, and it's human nature, they tend to get comfortable in the protection of the bankruptcy court. And I actually tell clients that I have to I'm trying to work myself out of a job as quickly as I can, because that's best for them. And in order to get out of Chapter 11, there's a several-step process. The first is that you have to file a disclosure statement, and a disclosure statement is something akin to a stock prospectus. It's a document that gives creditors enough information about the reorganization so that they can make an informed decision about whether to vote for or against the reorganization. The second part of it, once the disclosure statement is approved, is the plan of reorganization. And that's like the actual contract between you and the creditors, or the company and the creditors, that's approved by the court. And it's put out to a vote for creditors. There has to be a voting class that votes more than 2/3 in dollar amount and half in number. So it's weighted towards heavier creditors. And there have to be a number of other things you have to prove. Usually the biggest hurdle for companies in bankruptcy is to prove feasibility, that it's going to be successful. And that's not an easy process, and it takes financial acumen. It takes usually the help of a financial workout consultant or an accountant who can put together projections, and then it just takes time and effort. These are not simple documents to prepare.
Well, I think, thank you for that explanation, by the way, but I think that anybody who is thinking, I've given a name to my pain, and it's financial, financial insolvency, and so what I should do is file this Chapter 11, and it's all going to go away, and it's going to be pretty easy for me to do. ought to think long and hard about doing this, because from the time they file that petition, or from the time they hire a lawyer to file that petition, they're called on to supply lots of documents and lots of proof. It's not like you just hand your business over to your attorney and say, look, I need to file a bankruptcy. You get this done. When you're done with it, let me know. I'll be in Aruba.
No, that's absolutely not the way it works.
Yeah, you really have to work at this stuff.
It really is a team effort between my client's accountants or financial advisors, and myself, and other players as well. And sometimes, and hopefully the best plans also, even once a company's in Chapter 11, are consensual. This company that I was mentioning before, ultimately we reached an agreement with the major creditors that everybody agreed that this was the appropriate plan to come out of bankruptcy. There wasn't a contest. It was negotiated. If you look at the literature about what Chapter 11 is supposed to do, among other things, is give creditors an opportunity to sit down at the table and talk and try to negotiate. Whereas nobody's going to get everything they want, but everybody's going to get something, and allow the company to come out of bankruptcy, continue to be an active player in the community and in commerce. So.
A judge that I encountered recently had a quote that I thought was really brilliant, and he said, "A good agreement is when neither party is completely happy." And I thought, that's pretty much true. I mean, nobody's going to get everything they want. So in general terms, when somebody's filing a Chapter 11, what they're really saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is my business is in trouble. I can't afford to pay all of my debt that I have now, but I'd like to remain in business and be able to bring this to a point, bring this to fruition where the business is then profitable again. And so I'm asking for help from my creditors to accept less or accept some sort of payment terms to be able to keep my business open. Fair assumption?
I mean, sometimes it's because there just has to be some hiatus from the creditor pressures.
Right.
So there's really no choice because of certain actions that are being taken.
Can you give me an example?
But the idea that you're talking about is, there's a viable business, and it may be able to make a profit and pay off some money to creditors, but it may have incurred such a huge debt load that it can't pay all the debt that's out there that has been incurred in prior circumstances. I mean, one I was talking about earlier, I was contacted by a company that was functioning reasonably well, and then when 9/11 hit, 80% of their business was overseas sales, and it was big ticket items. It wasn't styrofoam cups. It was machinery that went for six figures at a pop.
Sure.
And 2 months loss of business created a huge cash flow hiccup for them.
Oh, I bet.
And
probably millions at least, right?
Yeah, I forget the exact numbers now. It was 12 years ago.
Right.
But it was. So a Chapter 11 might work in a circumstance like that, where there's essentially a functioning business, but there was a huge cash flow problem. There were certain companies, I represented a company a few years ago, they spent several years developing and building a building for part of their business. It opened in September 2008. When Lehman Brothers went into Chapter 11 and the financial crisis hit, if you could have picked a worse time to open a new part of the business.
I have a great idea. Let's open the business, right?
Well, but they started it in 2004.
Sure.
It wasn't they were being reckless.
Right.
It's that they just got caught up in something much bigger than themselves. So the Chapter 11 does provide time to get some stabilization. Maybe get a huge discount in the unsecured debts, maybe structure something with the secured creditor, try to address tax claims. There's a process where a company can reject leases that are not profitable, for facilities that are not being used anymore.
Sure.
You can sell leases in bankruptcy, actually. Sometimes a fair amount of Chapter 11 cases are actually liquidating Chapter 11s, where there's an orderly liquidation of the assets, because that will provide a lot more money than everything going out on an auctioneer's hammer. So there's a lot of different reasons why Chapter 11 can be useful.
I want to talk more about that, about how people can file a Chapter 11, what things they can do before they get into the Chapter 11 to save themselves from that when we come back. So when we're back, my guest Steve Weiss from Schatz, Schwartz & Fenton will rejoin us in a moment.
Underwriting for the Money Doctor Show is provided by Ryan and Casey Liquors, Main Street, Greenfield. Exploring the world, one glass at a time. West County Equipment Rental of Shelburne. Daily, weekly, monthly rentals. 625-6463 or on the web at westcountyequipment.com. Weld Communications, Marketing and Publicity. helping businesses spread the word in the Pioneer Valley and beyond. www.weldwords.com.
Welcome back to The Money Doctor. I'm here today with attorney Steve Weiss from Schatz, Schwartz & Fenton. I'm getting better at that as we go on. Welcome back, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks. So give me some idea of what someone could expect if they call your office and they say, I'm really worried and I'm trying to find out if a Chapter 11 is the right move for us to make.
Well, it's interesting. What I liken this to is it's sort of like medical triage, only it's really economic triage. Because people, at first, you start off with the fact that nobody wakes up in the morning and says, gee, this feels like a good day to talk to a bankruptcy attorney or to file for Chapter 11. Nobody, I know that's not the way the world works.
Oh yeah, they hold off as long as possible.
They come into me when they're worried, when they're stressed, when they've lost sleep. They have a certain amount of a deer in the headlights look. And they may have got some information off whether it's from the internet or from a colleague about what a Chapter 11 can and can't do, and they're trying to figure out whether does that make sense. So then what I try to do during that initial meeting is, again, it's triage. I try to find out if there is a crisis that can't wait at all, like the utilities are about to be turned off or the IRS is about to seize the assets, or whether there's whether there's time to work on things, and then what can be worked on. Whether there's an opportunity to sell certain assets that might reduce the amount of the debt, whether there's an opportunity to reach a forbearance agreement or a loan modification with the secured lender, whether there's an opportunity for some financing, maybe even some unconventional financing. There's all sorts of different alternatives. And sometimes it's a matter of getting from here to there. The cash flow is awful right now. What can the business do to get to the time when cash flow is going to improve? Maybe there's a big contract that's about to come through. I had a client years ago that thought they were going, if they looked like they might be able to get a contract selling goods to Home Depot. If that came through, the business was going to be fine. Now, unfortunately, it didn't come through, and ultimately the business ended up liquidating. But at least we were able to try to figure out what might work to help the business work.
Right. When is it a bad idea for somebody to file a Chapter 11?
Well, there's a lot. It's hard to answer that question.
When is the wrong? Well, I mean, some people must be pushing you, going, "I don't care. I just want this over. Just file this thing."
Yeah. Well, I guess the hardest ones are sometimes people have just an absolutely unrealistic expectation of A, what Chapter 11 can do, or B, and this is more common, what the business can do. Part of what I do is not just the legal part of it is psychology.
Right.
And it's not unusual for someone to come in and say, someone who's had a business for 15 or 20 years, or may have been taken over the business from a family member, from a father or mother or grandfather, and from an objective point of view, the business is utterly insolvent and will always be insolvent.
But they're emotionally tied.
But they're emotionally tied up in it. Sometimes I feel like I'm an undertaker or an oncologist, saying this business simply can't survive.
I know, that's really hard to tell people.
And I've had to tell people on occasion, look, I can file a Chapter 11 for you. I can take the retainer and do all of that, but I'm not doing you any good. It's not a good use of your money or your energies. It's just not feasible. And those are the bad times.
Here's the brick wall. You're banging your head against it. I'm trying to give you a little cushion there. And you're saying, no, I like the brick wall. I want to bang my head against it some more. You wonder, why do they want to stay in business? When there's no, you answered exactly what I was asking. When there's no good outlook in the future. You file a Chapter 11, I think, to be able to give yourself time and the resources you need to turn your business around back to a place where it's healthy again. And when there's never going to be a place where it's healthy again, why are you filing Chapter 11? Why not just, make an agreement to give the properties back or do all those other things that we were going to talk about?
Well, and
things that people can do.
And sometimes, it may be appropriate to file a Chapter 11 to buy some time to try to figure out if a contract is going to come through.
Right.
Although, by the same token, the Home Depots of the world don't like to do business with little companies in Chapter 11. It may be a self-defeating prophecy, so to speak.
That's a double-edged sword, sure.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. But then there may be times where where a company tries to do something that would allow it to reorganize, and if it doesn't work, then the answer is that the Chapter 11 sort of morphs into a liquidating Chapter 11, because the the recovery from the assets in an organized and supervised liquidation, an orderly liquidation, is often going to be better than simply surrendering the assets to the bank or the secured lender and letting an auction happen.
Right.
And then from the individual's point of view, and I'll make up numbers here, assuming the individuals have guaranteed $1 million worth of bank debt, if the assets at auction would go for $500,000, but the assets in an orderly liquidation would go from $800,000 or $900,000.
Right.
Now they've benefited in some way or another because they've reduced their guarantee exposure.
Right. We had an auctioneer on the show at one point, and we talked a little bit about that, if memory serves me correctly. An auctioneer will always tell you that they're going to get the best money for these things because it's going to excite people, and you're going to get competition, and there's all of that, which is possibly true. But I think a lot of people see, if it's going up for auction, I'm going to give some lowball offer. Very often the bank ends up buying back the properties or whatever anyway. And you're absolutely right. When it's done under that premise, you may not get as much out of it as you hope to.
Yeah, and it depends on the assets. I mean, I've been to a number of auctions over the years, and sometimes you do get a bidding frenzy.
Right.
And that process, and I should say also in bankruptcy, one of the sale procedures that's in bankruptcy cases, certainly locally and I think nationally, is, and I'll use the example, let's say, of selling a piece of real estate. If a Chapter 11 debtor enters into an agreement to sell the real estate for, let's say, $200,000 to make up a number, there's a procedure whereby people can make counter bids to that. So you almost get you get the benefit of a fair market sale and then an auction on top of it, because people can make counter offers. And I've had situations where I started off having a piece of real estate that was on the market for $300,000. I get an offer for $300,000, and then other people once that sale gets filed with the bankruptcy court and there's an opportunity for people to make counter offers, they do.
Wow.
And it's gone up considerably. It doesn't always happen.
The
Again,
buyers can't love that. Right.
Well, no, and that's they're also sometimes entitled to something called a breakup fee to compensate them for the time, effort, and trouble of being the first bidder out there.
Oh, that's
otherwise, nobody would be the first bidder.
Okay, so tell me, if I'm a business and I file a Chapter 11, I get through the whole obstacle course to the point where finally a petition is filed, what can my business do and not do while I'm under Chapter 11?
The short answer is, and again,
I always ask you these long,
you do ask long
big
questions,
right?
But what the company can do in Chapter 11 is continue to operate in the ordinary course of business. Anything outside of the ordinary course of business needs court permission. And I always tell my clients, let me make that decision, what's ordinary course and what requires court permission. And it depends on the context and the business. And for instance, if a car dealership goes into Chapter 11, selling cars is what it does. It doesn't need court permission every time it goes to sell a car to a consumer.
Right.
On the other hand, if I'm representing a small construction company and they want to sell 2 or 3 pickup trucks just to raise some cash, that's not in the ordinary course of what the construction company does. That requires court approval.
Interesting. Huh. Do you have I was going to ask you, what's the funniest bankrupt story you have? I'm sure you don't have a funny bankrupt story, but what's one of the most interesting cases that you've ever seen go through Chapter 11 and come out the other side, and then maybe one that you saved before Chapter 11?
Well, one of the most interesting ones in some ways is actually one I was representing a lender in. It's public record, so I can talk about it. Several years ago, Irving Paper went into Chapter 11.
Perfect one to bring up here.
Well, because it affected a lot of people, and
yes.
They came out of Chapter 11. It was really what I'll call a traditional reorganization. They restructured the debt. The company had legacy costs, if you will, from back when it had I don't know how many employees it had, but it'd been around for over 100 years. It had an old-fashioned defined benefit pension plan that had, at the end of the day, I think the projected liability was something like $15 to $18 million.
Wow.
And through the reorganization process and terminating the plan and getting the PBGC involved and doing all of those actuarial things, it did save the company $15 to $18 million. And Irving Paper is still there. It is operating, and that was an extraordinarily successful reorganization.
At least from the company's standpoint, what happened to the defined benefit plan for the people that would have benefited from it?
Well, the PBGC took over some of the liability,
Okay.
And there may have been some reduction in pensions, and
Right.
that's we get
But
back
some
to
of it got paid.
Some is better than
Then none.
That's exactly right.
Right.
And now there's still a company that is one of the largest employers in Franklin County,
Right.
still there and operating, which it might not have been able to do.
Yeah.
The legacy costs for the company were just enormous.
Wow. It's interesting that you bring that one up too. That was fun. Now, a company that maybe you thought was headed to Chapter 11 and never even had to file a petition. Do you have a story about that?
Yeah, and I can't mention names of
You're
that
so
one.
good. You always have stories when I ask you on the spot like
Well,
that.
I've in 25 plus years of practice, I've picked up a few
Sure.
stories along the way.
Yeah.
But about 4 years ago, I was contacted by some people who owned a couple or three related businesses in the real estate. And again, they had the deer in the headlights look. The bank had threatened to take possession of everything. It looked like either an emergency Chapter 11 or some sort of shutdown or liquidation. And once we got control of the situation, I contacted the bank's counsel, and we were able to put together a series of forbearance agreements, whereby payments were made at a reduced rate for, I think the first time we did it was for 6 months. The second time it might have been for a year, while our client tried to take care of certain things about getting the business, taking care of some of the other problems with the business. There were some tax issues they had to deal with.
Those tax issues, those get a lot of people.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And again, that company bought real estate near the top of the market. These were hardworking people that have owned the company, owned their businesses for 25 plus years. They bought some real estate at the exact wrong time.
Sure.
They overpaid for it.
Right.
They had bank debt that they really couldn't service at that level. And it's now 4 years later. They never had to file a Chapter 11 for any of the related companies. They're operating. They've got a longer-term relationship with the bank. And I spoke with one of the owners of the company just the other day, and they're doing really well right now.
Oh, that's good.
Again, I can't mention names.
Well, it's not necessary.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
But it's from my personal point of view as a lawyer, it feels really good to have been able to help them through that. Nobody else knows about it in the sense that there was no publicity. It didn't hurt the business at all. They were able to keep operating the business and get through the crucible, if you will, of a workout.
Wow. That's kind of fun because I think most bankruptcy attorneys would, at least most people would think bankruptcy attorneys just want to file bankruptcies. That's all they want to do is push paper. And I haven't found that to be true at all. I think most bankruptcy attorneys get into it from an interest and a love of helping people and whatnot. We only have about 2 minutes left, but I wanted to ask you, what do you think it is that causes people to stick their head in the sand, to delay, to procrastinate, to wait until it is absolutely, they don't see any other solution before they call you? Human
nature.
Yeah.
It really is human nature. It's one thing, someone has a business and they have a bad month. Well, the weather was bad.
Right.
They have a bad quarter. Well, there was some road construction down the street. That kept customers out of the store.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden that 3-month period turns into 6 months, and there's always some sort of excuse. And it's in the same way that people have avoidance about medical problems. They don't call a doctor until something hurts.
Yeah.
Actually, the closest analogy I've used sometimes, a medical analogy, is people don't like calling dentists either, and they don't call the dentist until that tooth is keeping them awake at night.
Right.
And it's the same with a bankruptcy attorney. No one wakes up in the morning and says, boy, this just feels like a great day to talk to an insolvency attorney. And they keep hoping things will turn around, and they keep ignoring some of the creditor calls, and then a lawsuit or two lands. And there may be a certain amount of denial, and eventually it becomes undeniable.
Yeah, I think there's an old saying about people won't do anything to fix it until the pain of the problem becomes worse than problem becomes worse than the pain of the solution.
That's
and
right.
And then they'll go about it. How do people get in touch with you if they want to call? Schwartz and Fenton?
Well, they can call us up. Our main office is in Springfield at 737-1131. Okay. We are on the internet at ssfpc.com. We can be found that way. We're pretty easy to find.
You are pretty easy to find, and if all else fails, they can call us at Power Down Debt, and I've got your phone number on speed dial, I think, at this point.
Yeah, and I will sit and talk with people and try to give them at least a a sense of what their solution, what their problems are. They usually know mostly what the problems are, but what the potential solutions are, and hopefully give them a little chance to make the right decisions and be able to sleep a little better at night.
Well, I feel confident that you will. Thank you for being here again.
My pleasure.
Until our next chat, Steve Weiss and I will remind you, keep it positive.
There's a better life if I could be debt free, but all my money is a mystery. I was feeling overwhelmed and it was wearing thin when I knocked on the door and heard the doctor's in. Oh, the doctor's in, the doctor's in. She got the right prescription to help you win. Oh, the doctor's in, the money doctor's in.